What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show. It's Wednesday, October 21st, and I'm Dave Loughran. With me, as always, Matt Gajewski, Kyle Dvorchak, taking a first look at our first run of ownership and stacks on this Week 7 slate. We're happy to have all of you guys with us. As always, hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. You've heard me say this. We're, trying to build up the subscriber base, and 42% of the people that watch this show still don't subscribe. So if you haven't done so yet, right that wrong. Join us. Hit the notification bell as well so you always know when new content's going to drop next. Kyle, I said to Matt before the show got started that it feels like this could be a week with really flat ownership. And as it stands right now, we know, disclaimer, ownership will absolutely adjust throughout the week. You will see a lot of moving parts here, and it is always going to be in flux. It's more accurate the closer we get to Sunday. But as it stands right now, and this is way different from any other week, there's nobody at any position projected for north of 21% ownership.
Yeah, I'm looking at quarterback too. We have no one projected over, I believe, 8.3 is our highest quarterback. Like this is the ultimate, the blender slate where you just play whoever the hell you want because you're not going to be eating a ton of chalk. So I think this is maybe a slate that it will be almost the most different as opposed to every other week. We've at least had some amount of chalk coming in. Like last week, everyone wanted to play Alexander Madison, Derrick Henry, and I think the Madison play didn't work out. It made some sense. Derrick Henry obviously just absolutely ate my lunch. Maybe this is a slate where, you don't have to get different. Your cash game might not look too strategically different from your tournament builds, with the caveat that I'm probably still stacking way more in my tournaments. Yeah, this is going to be a different slate, maybe more so than any other one.
Matt, last week, if you look at the $500,000 slant on DraftKings, and we break all of this down on our Monday morning quarterback show. So check that out. Adam Scher, Josh Ingleman, and myself. We take a look over everything that happened for the week, break down the winning lineups and what we can apply for the following week. There were 11 players, one of them a defense, the Dolphins, but still 11 overall that came in with 20+% ownership. 3 of them north of 25%, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 9 above 23. So there wasn't any mega chalk. There wasn't any week 1 Boston Scott chalk, right? But there was definitely a lot of players that were getting a good amount of attention. I wouldn't be surprised this week if there's a whole lot less than that, and you just have a ton of players scattered in between that like 10 to 19% range.
Yeah, there's 6 games with a total at 50 or higher. So we saw this a couple weeks ago, but in that week, we just had Dallas in like the nut spot of all time. So they came in with high ownership. And this week, I don't think we have that. Like Seattle and Arizona play each other. Those are both great spots. Detroit and Atlanta play each other. Those are both great spots. Houston, Green Bay, again, both great spots. So I think you're right that we might see ownership come in a little more condensed, at least on some of these good plays, but still flat between them.
So stick with you, Matt, here, and we can jump right into it. There are a few spots that I feel pretty confident will change throughout the week. We're going to talk chalk first. If you're new to DFS, if you're just coming across the channel, number 1, welcome. Number 2, chalk is very simply just, the popular plays this week. The plays that are more appealing for cash doesn't mean they're not GPP viable. Oftentimes they very much are. And sometimes to get away from that, you just come in way overweight. But the chalk this week, if there is any, starting off at the running back position, you've got a few guys that, and we're going to talk pivots and top stacks as well, but you've got a few guys here that are above 20%. I'll throw Alvin Kamara in there at 19% as well. But when you view the top of the position, from Kamara to Elliott to Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Kareem Hunt, even James Conner. Not saying all of them are great plays. Derrick Henry, a very difficult matchup against Pittsburgh. But I could make a fantastic argument that Kamara or Elliott or Jones or Kareem Hunt or James Conner could easily be in the winning lineup, the Millie Maker winning lineup this week. And I'm just literally reading down the list of the top priced guys at running back.
Yeah, I mean, they're all in great spots too, at least most of them, and the ones that aren't. Like Derrick Henry, you mentioned him maybe not in the greatest spot, but he has the volume to back it up still. So I think he's viable there. You get guys that have disappointed in recent weeks like Kareem Hunt. He heads to Cincinnati. That's a fantastic spot. So there's a lot of reasons to like these guys maybe that haven't even performed well. And I think that's why we will see some ownership maybe a little bit flatter. I mean, I'm looking at the list too. There's like maybe a dozen running backs that look pretty good and have at least 9% ownership right now, between like 9 and 20. And we generally don't see that.
You don't. And Kyle, let's go ahead, dive right into this. I actually want to start with Ezekiel Elliott, and feel free to work your way around the top of the position from these, 7K and up guys. We've got a few of them this week. Christian McCaffrey's up there, but he's not expected to play. With Ezekiel Elliott, it was really tough to watch the other day. Matt and I broke down the Monday night games and talked about how, Andy Dalton at super cheap price point could be viable. Did he play well? No, nobody's going to pretend that he played great. But there was a dropped touchdown and consecutive fumbles from Ezekiel Elliott on back-to-back drives. CeeDee Lamb clearly got interfered with, got pushed over, and that turned into an interception. But Ezekiel Elliott's 2 fumbles were so costly. And then you saw Tony Pollard come in and essentially get almost a full drive until they finally established a run, as the color commentator said, and said, hey, great time to bring Zeke back in. Besides the point, does Ezekiel Elliott continue to carry or shoulder the same workload in a game where they might finally not be playing from behind? Because they've played from behind I feel like every single game this season, they've played from behind in the second half or the first half up until the fourth quarter. Now you get a matchup against Washington. Zeke still had 23 total looks last week because he was targeted 11 times, but they can't get him going on the ground because the offensive line is so banged up, and they can't play games without being down by multiple scores. So let's start with Elliott, your take to start off the week.
Yeah, so this kind of reminds me of the Chris Carson situation from last year, I believe. He started fumbling the ball through the first 6 or 7 weeks at an incredible clip. But then towards the second half of the year, he regressed to an average fumble rate, and he got a lot of work. And that's when we finally saw him also getting work as a pass catcher. Ezekiel Elliott already has that, but I think it's important to just know that, while maybe you could argue that some players fumble at higher rates, I think Adrian Peterson was that guy before my time. Hardly remember him. Only remember him over the age of 30. But Adrian Peterson is a guy who fumbled more than average, I believe. Ezekiel Elliott, maybe you can make that argument for, but they're such random events. They're the drops of running backs, essentially. They're such random events. Volume would predict them more so than anything else. I don't think we're going to see a 2 fumble game from Zeke probably for the rest of the year. Probably not versus Washington. Because of that, I don't think we see much Tony Pollard again going forward. And like you said, finally a spot where we could potentially, I don't want to get too out over my skis on Dallas, they look terrible. We could potentially see them have a lead through most of a football game, which is exceedingly rare for them. So I think for Washington, they're bad and Andy Dalton's bad. But Washington is the spot where he'd bounce back. Does that make me fall in love with him? Not necessarily. I actually kind of like, at a similar price point, a guy like Alvin Kamara, not so much Derrick Henry, but even going down to Aaron Jones. Not that I think Zeke is a bad play. It's just I kind of like Alvin Kamara more.
Okay. Yeah. And Sean says in chat, Pollard always handles a series in the first half to give Zeke a break. Sure. We know he gets worked in, but you can't really overstate the fact that it was immediately after Zeke's second fumble. Does that mean anything? Not necessarily, but we have to talk about it. But ultimately, Matt and Kyle said, we're hoping that they can finally get out to a lead, but they were down 2 scores to the Giants just a couple weeks ago. I don't see a spot where Kyle Allen and the football team really get out to an early start, but I'm not going to pretend they can't. The positive thing is if they do, Zeke is still going to be featured in the passing game. So right now he's coming in around 14% ownership. Assuming it stays close to that throughout the week, how do you approach somebody like him? And what are you doing with the guys around him like Kamara and Aaron Jones and Kareem Hunt, all of whom are 1, 2, and 3 at the position?
I think you can certainly play Zeke. You guys have been talking about the opportunity. It's not going anywhere. Even in negative game script, he still is the target share. It's fantastic. So you think the football team gets up on this game. Zeke is still pretty secure. You are worried about efficiency, but volume is what I'm more concerned with. I think the main problem with Zeke, of course, is opportunity cost with an expensive runner. You get players with similar touch counts at a cheaper price. Aaron Jones is in a much, much better matchup against arguably the worst run defense in football. And if you look at yards allowed per attempt, the Houston Texans are actually allowing the most yards per attempt to opposing rushers this year. Aaron Jones is still averaging over 20 touches a game himself, despite being in more of what we would call a timeshare. But they just use their running back so much that Jones can still get over 20 touches per game in that situation. You also have, if you want to talk like you say Ezekiel Elliott finally getting into a good matchup, well, we have the same thing with Kareem Hunt, and he's 6,800 on DraftKings. So those are two cheaper running backs with, I think, similar touch projections, also in good matchups. So I think you can just make the argument based on opportunity cost that maybe Zeke getting away from him is a good idea.
All right. Yeah, and obviously the offensive line for Dallas isn't going to do them many favors. If Zeke comes in as like the fourth or fifth highest running back, I'm probably going back to that well, whether I want to or not. Someone mentioned that he's one of the most overrated players in the league. Look, maybe that's true, but it doesn't really matter if the volume is going to be there. I kind of don't care. Kyle, what are you doing with the Kamaras and the Aaron Jones and the Kareem Hunts of this world?
Yeah, I think it sounds like Matt and I are kind of on the same wavelength where like Zeke's volume is good and the spot is good, but he's expensive. He's modestly popular. There are spots like Kareem Hunt where you could potentially get, the same or similar amounts of volume. We've basically seen like Deante Johnson and a few other backs like get in some work, but specifically as a receiver, I believe Hunt has out-targeted his backups 7-2. So he's essentially a 3-down back. He's probably seeing just as much work as Zeke is, sans a few rushing attempts, but who knows if Tony Pollard gets in. But he's significantly cheaper. I think Mike Davis in a spot that I think the Carolina-New Orleans game is going to be a bit underowned, so I'm trying to attack all pieces of this game. Up until last week was basically Christian McCaffrey light. Like, I'm still going to lean on a larger sample of weeks where he gets used like Christian McCaffrey. You could definitely say he's less talented, but like you said, I really do not care about a running back's talent if we're going to see them get 8 targets and 15 carries in a game. If we're going to see Zeke get 20 carries and 11 targets in a game, I don't care if you think he's overpaid or underpaid. I don't care if you think Christian McCaffrey is as good as Mike Davis or if Mike Davis is a better version. I truly don't care. I want volume at 6,600. Mike Davis, he gives you Aaron Jones level. He gives you Zeke level as a pass catcher and a little bit less as a runner, but at a cheaper price. So I don't mind paying down, especially off Zeke, especially off of Henry. Alvin Kamara is maybe the one exception where I do think he's the guy worth paying up. And that's probably mostly a product of, I think Carolina, New Orleans is one of the games I'm going to be talking about a lot on the show.
What are your thoughts on someone like James Conner? He's priced in that same range he's priced in the same range as Kareem Hunt. He's not much less expensive than Aaron Jones. He's $100 more expensive than Mike Davis. He's right in that mid to upper 6K range with a lot of other talented backs. You said the Carolina New Orleans game looks underowned right now. I agree. I think the Tennessee-Pittsburgh game, and wait till we get to some of these Pittsburgh receivers, I think that game is underowned as well with a 51-plus point total. The Titans games averaging north of 60 total points this season, since week 2. There's a lot going on there. And James Conner's coming off a 20-carry game. Now, he was targeted only once in that one, but it was a monster blowout. There was really zero need to get the running backs involved heavily as pass catchers. He's probably going to see 3, 4, 5 targets in the passing game in what could actually be a relatively high-scoring affair. Does James Conner, if his ownership comes in way less than some of these other guys at a similar price, appeal to you at all?
Yeah, he appeals. James Conner is he absolutely appeals to me because, like you said, he's going to be the lead back in a game where they're favored with a lot of points. Actually, I don't know if they're probably not favored because they're at Tennessee. Are they?
I thought they were minus. I think they were laying 1 point last time I looked.
Pittsburgh is minus 2.5.
Okay, 2 points now.
Oh, okay. They're actually more favored than I thought. So yeah,
it was 1.5 yesterday too. So it's actually moving towards Pittsburgh.
Yeah, maybe I should be more interested in James Conner for that reason. If you're going to be favorites against Tennessee defense that gives up points and their offense also scores points, that's a great game environment to be playing in. He's always the player that, if I'm building 150, I just don't touch his projection. If he gets in there, he gets in there because I never have a strong stance on him. He gets a lot of carries. He gets a handful of targets, has a 100-yard bonus touchdown upside, but it's not like early Mike Davis days where I'm like, guys, this guy is getting so much work. We have to get in on him. Or like Alvin Kamara, I'm like, guys, without Michael Thomas, he's just Michael Thomas light. I have no strong opinions on James Conner. So he's probably a decent projection. If he comes in under owned, I might actually try and bump up my ownership to gain extra leverage. He's really just the most middle of the road play. He's in a good spot though, so I'm sure I'll have some of him. And if he does end up if it shakes out by the end of the week that he is one of the good volume, relatively good price and low owned, at that point I probably will actually have to get myself significantly above the field on him.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're all sharing similar opinions here, but Matt, it comes back to what we talked about at the top of the show. I don't think anyone's going to run away with ownership. There were a couple comments in chat that Kamara and Aaron Jones, or it might have been Jones and Hunt, are going to have exorbitant ownership at the end of the week. It's definitely possible, but again, you could sit here and be like, James Conner's a great play because of this. Kareem Hunt's a great play because of this. You guys already made that argument. Aaron Jones because of this. Ezekiel Elliott and Kamara because of this. And hell, even Derrick Henry, because how many other guys have 25, 30 carry upside? It's a really, really interesting spot at that 66, 6,700 and up range. So let's close it out here because all of them are getting a decent amount of ownership, kind of flat, but a decent amount. Who are your favorite options now from that range?
Are we still talking this kind of mid to upper range?
Yeah, like above the 66 and up. I say that because they're all some of the highest owned running backs right now, 10%, between 10 and 20%.
So I don't hate getting away from that range. There's a couple of guys that are cheap, but to answer I'm going to answer your question. Don't worry about it. I still like getting a little bit contrarian in this range. I think if you go to a guy like Joe Mixon, he literally has some of the best volume in football. You're just concerned that he's constantly playing on a team that's an underdog. So what's the scoring potential here? A little bit of run bad for Joe Mixon with Joe Burrow rushing in a touchdown and Giovanni Bernard getting a score last week. Otherwise, we're looking at another massive Joe Mixon game. So I think he's always viable as a pivot. Otherwise, in this range, I don't think you can really go wrong. And the only guy I have significant concerns with is maybe, Clyde Edwards-Helaire with Le'Veon Bell potentially playing. Chris Carson has seen a reduced role, so he's 6.4. Those are really the only two guys I think I'm trying to avoid in that range.
Yeah, it was some run bad. And remember, Joe Mixon left that game for a little while with that injury and returned. He only had one carry in the second half of the game, which actually went for a touchdown. Kyle, other guys that are getting a decent amount of ownership right now, David Johnson, Mike Davis, 13%, Edwards-Helaire. That's it. But you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 guys projected for 10+%. We can get into, I want to get into some pivots in a little bit, but let me actually flip the page to you, Kyle, with wide receivers. Devonte Adams coming off a rough week. There were ways that could have turned around. It could have been better, but it wasn't. One long, I think 25, 30-yard pass could have changed the game up a little bit, but it is price point. You still would have needed more than that. Stephon Diggs coming in at 15%, and then Keenan Allen, assuming he's able to play, is 15% as well. Very high-owned wide receivers can get you into trouble sometimes because you're reliant on, the targets to be there and also for them to catch them. With running backs, the volume's a lot more assured and a handoff is a lot more likely to happen and to not be botched. What are you doing at the top right now? Your thoughts on guys like Adams, Diggs, Allen, even Tyreek Hill up there around 15% as well?
Yeah, so this happened with, I think, both of DeAndre Hopkins and Devonte Adams. I know with DeAndre Hopkins, like you said, 8 targets for DeAndre Hopkins is not bad. I think he went 2 for 76 versus Dallas. That's a spot you expect him to blow up. And it just didn't happen because the projection on a wide receiver, even like DeAndre Hopkins, and as we saw with Devonte Adams, is quite fragile. So for that reason, 8,200, 7,900 is the split between DeAndre Hopkins being slightly more expensive and Devonte Adams being a little bit cheaper. But you get a pretty significant ownership discount by going to DeAndre Hopkins, which kind of blows my mind that Seattle, Arizona isn't coming in as the mega chalk because it has two. It's just weird, right? I actually have already talked about this week how I thought this would be the chalk spot and how do we get unique when attacking this game. I don't know if I actually need to get unique attacking this game. Apparently playing DeAndre Hopkins over Devonte Adams is modestly unique. So when we're looking at two guys who I think their projections are going to be very similar, both of them are true dominant alpha target hog receivers in great spots. Green Bay, Houston, another good spot, not knocking that. But I think Seattle and Arizona could be just as good of a spot coming in at lower ownership. So starting up at the top in terms of the most expensive players, I'm just going to say DeAndre Hopkins and Devonte Adams are essentially the same player. Who cares? They're both awesome players. in awesome spots, I'm just going to take the one that's lower owned. So I think that's probably my lean. Keenan Allen at 6,200. That is very cheap in a very good spot. And 15% ownership doesn't seem like a lot. Maybe you could argue that on the context of this slate, it is a lot because it makes him a top 3 owned player. I don't know. Like, we talk about getting off of some of these more fragile projections. Going to be tough to get off Keenan Allen for me. 6,200 is just so cheap. Like, maybe that's in response to like the Mike Williams breakout. Obviously, Keenan Allen also busted because he got hurt with back spasms in, I think it was the New Orleans game. I don't care, man. I'm going right back to Keenan Allen. Well, 6,200. Justin Herbert has just like loaded him with targets up until he got hurt. He should be healthy. I don't think there's any reason to expect he doesn't play yet. They said it was a fairly minor injury. I mean, it was just like back tightness, essentially. I'm going back to the well in Keenan Allen.
31.1% target share, second highest in the league this year. And Matt makes a point, or Kyle makes a point, Matt, that you would think you'd have to get unique trying to stack Arizona, Seattle, maybe a couple of other games. But with all of the great options, that game might have, that stack might have aggregate ownership of like 9%. And maybe we have to start considering this. It's something that, I just kind of thought of now. Maybe we're going to see more of this going through the rest of the season, and it won't be the exception to the rule for this reason. We're going to have so many games with monster totals. Detroit, Atlanta, 56.5 point total. Green Bay, Houston, 56. Seattle, Arizona, 56. Pittsburgh, even Tennessee, 51.5. 51 for Cleveland, Cincinnati, 51 for New Orleans, Carolina. And then you've got only 2 games on this entire slate that are under 48. So maybe this is something that we should be getting used to and begin seeing a trend that's going to open up spots like the Seattle and Arizona, where we don't have to go insane and roster Andy Isabella and guys that we really don't have any confidence in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, everything's an adjustment. I don't think it makes those games any better of a plays because we're seeing an adjustment league wide. It's, you still want to target your stacks in your high total games. It's now just the ceiling total is higher overall. There's still games, I think, that'll come in lower owned that have the potential to hit. Like last week, for example, that Tennessee game goes over 70 points total, and there's not another game that really approaches it. That's right. The game you need to stack. So there's always going to be situations like that. And I think the overall higher scoring context of the NFL just needs to be taken into consideration. It's not that different. We still want to target high total games. They're just higher total now.
Yeah, no doubt about it. What are your thoughts at wide receiver? Again, pretty flat distribution of ownership here. There's a bunch of guys above 10%, nobody above 17.
Well, we have Michael Thomas at 5.8, and I think that says it all.
Oh, okay, that's your analysis.
Michael Thomas is at 5. Michael Thomas is at 5.8% ownership
last week. That was the analysis on Julio Jones last week. You had Julio Jones at cheap and sub 10% ownership. That's all you need. I love this argument for Michael Thomas. That's all you need to know.
It's true. Sure. Matt does this thing sometimes though, where he'll finish a sentence, but he finishes a sentence and it sounds like he's continuing his sentence. So see, Kyle knows what I mean. So sometimes I'm like, all right, keep going, and then okay, well, he's done. Continue, Matt, if you were planning to continue.
Yeah, so, I mean, the matchup doesn't appear to be good. This Carolina secondary, which we thought was going to be the worst secondary in football, has actually been pretty good. Their defense hasn't been bad overall, and they're playing slow. So there's certainly reasons that you can poke holes in Michael Thomas, especially with the opportunity cost given Adams and DeAndre Hopkins in the same range. But this is the cheapest we've really seen Michael Thomas in, I don't know, a year and a half. And he's finally healthy. He was supposed to play in the previous game. And of course, he's only scratched because he punched his teammate.
Yeah, right. So we're told. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable that he's coming in so low. Oh, and it's crazy because Kyle goes to DeAndre Hopkins with lower ownership than Adams. And then you can essentially one up that with, hey, yeah, but what about Michael Thomas at 5%? Would I be surprised by the end of the week if all 3 of these guys come in around like 12, 13%? No, but that's still not that high. For Hopkins, for Adams, for Thomas, it's really not that high for any of them. Kyle, what about Calvin Ridley, though? Last week, it was obviously an explosive game, 130 plus yards, 2 scores from Julio Jones in his return to the gridiron. But Calvin Ridley still had a serviceable game, right? It wasn't what you wanted. You'd much rather have had Julio, but 6 for 61 and a score, 7 targets, had an 8-yard rushing rush as well. He was still involved. It was still okay. And we know that he still has immense blow-up potential, easy to score potential, just like Julio does any week. But now you've got that price point really in the same family as Thomas and Adams, and sure, below Hopkins, but he's the 4th highest priced receiver on DraftKings.
Yeah, that's kind of, you're talking about the things that I'm thinking about. It's kind of the issue with him where I can pay $300 more for Michael Thomas. I can pay a little less to get Julio Jones. I can pay a lot less to get Keenan Allen, a little more for Devonte Adams.
And Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, and Devonte Adams, none of them play alongside a Julio Jones either.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and the problem is, also, when I want to play, let's say, for example, I want to play Devonte Adams. I know that if I'm playing Devonte Adams, I am at least giving a lot of deference to playing Aaron Rodgers in that lineup and a second receiver, because I'm pretty much always, like, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, double stack and typically running it back. Do I double stack when I play Calvin Ridley with Julio Jones and Matt Ryan? It's quite unlikely, because 7,300 and 7,100, we essentially need 50 plus points from the game, if not even the team. Like, we saw 40 points and they both didn't win tournaments because Julio Jones went off. Calvin Ridley, not so much. I think Hayden Hurst was in the Millie Maker winning lineup because 15 points from Hayden Hurst was a lot better than 18 or whatever from Calvin Ridley. So it makes the double stack a little more difficult, knowing that we have 2 target monsters that are probably going to struggle to go off in the same game. It's another reason that I'm just meh on playing Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. I think the opportunity cost is quite high with, Stephon Diggs on the slate, with Devonte Adams and Michael Thomas. And it does make stacking a bit more difficult. Do I want to go to a Russell Gage or a Hayden Hurst? I don't love those plays. I'd much rather go, instead of Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, I'd much rather go Michael Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, or go, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, whatever you want to do. The stacking option is really what puts the nail in the coffin that I'm just going to be with or below the field on the Falcons this week.
Okay. I remember back in the Roddy White days, it was Roddy or Julio, and then it was Calvin or Julio. Do you guys remember that season, the trade-offs, the week-to-week season? I know someone in chat's got to remember this. Do you know what I'm talking about, where it was every other week it was Julio, and then was it Ridley? Was it Roddy? I don't even know who it was, but every other week they traded off big games. I don't know. Maybe we'll get the same thing this week, Matt, but the top of the position is just so loaded with talent that you've got Diggs against the Jets. He should slaughter them in that spot, regardless of Josh Allen's struggles over the last 2 weeks. You have Julio against Detroit in another very high-scoring projected affair. Metcalf against Arizona. I do want to ask you about him, though, because, against Minnesota, we saw his target count really start to climb late in that game. And once they got down in that goal-to-go situation, Wilson locked in on DK Metcalf. It was really a sight to behold. The guy's a freak of nature, particularly in the end zone. But now, similar to Ridley, you're paying a premium on Metcalf. You're paying a premium on Diggs. These guys are both in games where they should be able to put up monster numbers. Diggs is projected for the 2nd highest ownership at the position, and Metcalf, you've got to come down to a sub 10% spot where he's coming in at 7%. Is that projected lower ownership worth enough to you to pay north of $7,000 for him against Arizona?
Yeah, I'm definitely willing to pay for Metcalf. I think part of the issue with Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, for that matter, is just how fragile their target shares are, because they're not in a fast offense and they're living purely on efficiency. They're not even, they're still a fairly pass-heavy offense, but right now they're 28th in plays per game, and they're only 23rd in seconds per play. So if this team gets up and they take a run-heavy approach, you're not going to see a ceiling game for Metcalf. Even in the last 4 games, Metcalf has target counts of 6, 8, 6, and 11. So his most recent game, fantastic, but he has 2 6s mixed in there, where if he doesn't catch a big play for you, which he does a lot, but if he doesn't, he likely busts your lineup. And we've seen that with Lockett recently. Lockett had the hot start. His most recent games, we look 8 targets, 13 targets, and then 4 and 5. People were heavy on Lockett those weeks. He's the one that busted your lineup. So really fragile targets in Seattle. I think you just have to know that going in if you're going to play them.
Yeah, no question. Kyle, if we're taking a look at any of these other high-owned guys, we're going to get to our pivots momentarily. At tight end, there really isn't much, right? And I don't really even like to talk about chalk too often at this spot, because it's such a bad position that Sometimes you're going to get someone paying a premium for Travis Kelce, and this week it looks like he will be really the only chalky tight end. 18% we've got him projected for right now. We've got Kittle around 10%. These guys are $200 separated on DraftKings at $6,300 and $6,500 respectively. But everything could change if Keenan Allen doesn't play, and then Hunter Henry might be the chalkiest play on the slate. There's a lot of things that could happen here, but I don't generally like to spend a whole lot of time talking chalk at the position because usually there's no one that's insanely popular at any tier, really.
Yeah, I agree. We've seen this pretty much every week when we have one or two of the stud premium tight ends. They end up being fairly popular and the rest is quite flat. And even then, like 10% ownership for Kittle is really not that much different than 8.4 for Hunter Henry. It's really Travis Kelce and then the rest. I think you could leverage that with a Tyreek Hill who's surprisingly cheap, $6,400. And that does come off the back of Travis Kelce scoring all of the touchdowns in terms of the receiving touchdowns. Tyreek Hill had I think it was 3 catches for 20 yards last week. I get that he probably, like a lot of these other guys, because he's not going to see a ton of targets, he builds his fantasy points off of air yards, is fragile, but maybe he offers you a little bit of leverage off of Travis Kelce, and then you can pivot down. I don't have any strong takes. I think maybe Logan Thomas punt. He finally scored last week, but it wasn't on a ton of volume. I think I'm fine living in this, not Jonnu Smith. We're not doing Jonnu Smith, but living in this Eric Ebron, Hunter Henry, potentially TJ Hawkinson tier of guys. I'm not sure I'm confident in fading Travis Kelce, but you could potentially do it with a Tyreek Hill in the game environment versus Denver. I'm not sure how much I want to target teams playing Denver just because what is Denver possibly going to do against a Kansas City defense that continues to impress?
Yeah, and Matt, it's a lot like we talked about on Monday where it's a lot different than our discussion on Monday with a 2-game slate where Travis Kelce was far and away the best option at the position. And we said, if you do take that risk and fade him, you are hoping that he doesn't have, even 15 could crush you. Now, depends if you had guys like, I forget who else, someone else had a decent game, but it was essentially all Travis Kelce. 11-game slate, it's a little bit different. His price isn't as egregious, but how much weight do you put in the fact that Denver defensively is actually very good in both phases of the game? And are you willing to get away from Travis Kelce here, or would you consider him your favorite tight end from an ownership and pricing perspective?
I mean, you consider it a little bit, but he's still Denver does not have the personnel to stack up with Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. Even with Sammy Watkins out, they're just not going to be able to contain the Chiefs. So they'll have to pick their battles. Travis Kelce should get his. I think just the question on this slate is, can anyone overtake Travis Kelce? We know George Kittle certainly can. I think there's a reasonable argument for a guy like Hunter Henry. And then outside of that, I think you're just looking for the cheapest volume you can possibly get. Maybe Kelce has a 6-catch, 60-yard game, no score, and he puts up 12 points, and that's fine. But, a guy like Jordan Akins goes 230 in a score, and they're a similar, at least, score overall, but the price difference would allow you with a guy like, Jordan Akins to get you up somewhere else and hopefully make up that difference in your lineup. So I think you need relatively low scoring week from the tight end position if you're going to fade these top guys at the top.
All right, let's talk some pivots here before we do, and we'll talk our stacks as well. There's no real chalky stacks right now, though, but I got a couple low on ones that I really like. Before we do, though, for you guys that are missing out on that midday action that we had, look, the whole pandemic shit has been horrible and miserable from a sports perspective when it was March through June and we didn't really have anything. Mid to early June we had golf and all that, but for a while we had nothing. I mean, life was a whole lot different, and not just for sports. I mean, to minimize nothing here, so understand that much. But now, after having several months of basketball every single day, and baseball during the day and all of this great stuff, and then football on the weekends, it's gone. But there is still soccer. You've got Champions League soccer, and we've got projections that are going to help you win. It's that simple. And what we're doing now is if you use the promo code, all one word, Champions League, you get $2 weekly subscription for the soccer projections, Champions League, all of our soccer projections, and the premium Slack chat. So it's $2 if you want to jump in on that for the week. Check it out and still get some midday afternoon action, because who doesn't want that? If you want to check out everything else, we've got $3.95 express packages. All of the showdown content is now included, from the ownership to the projections to the top player rankings, or the top player tool, the rankings, all of that great stuff. All of our premium showdown stuff is available. And, you're getting 3 showdown slates every single week. So 1 week of that, just the showdown games are going to pay for themselves. That's on top of the other stuff we have, the rankings and everything else included in that Express Pass. But if you want to take it one step further, you can go with just the full NFL package, weekly, monthly, or annual. Of course, that's projections, ownership, all of that. Top stack tool created by Alex Baker himself, used by Alex Baker. You know him as Awesemo. You might know him as the #1 ranked DFS player in the world. These are his real tools that he uses and puts up on the site for us to use and become better players. You could do it all access to PGA, MMA, basketball, baseball, NASCAR, UFC, everything. All included, all the projections, the ownership, everything I've talked about. If these sites have contests, we have premium content for it. So you can do that. You can do weekly, monthly, annual, whatever you want. We've got something that fits everybody's budget. Go to awesemo.com/join. Check it out today. And if you have questions about the packages, I'm happy to answer them. Go to Twitter, hit me up. My DMs are open at Loughy_D, LOUGHY_D. You got to follow me though, because why not? And while you're at it, follow Matt at Matt_Gajewski and Kyle at Kyle Tweets here. Go to awesemo.com. Just /join, check it out. You have questions, hit us up. And if you do decide to join the community, to join the family, be sure to jump into our premium Slack chat. We got tons of people talking DFS and sports betting and everything around the clock. So it's a great place to be. Hope to see you over there. And do it after the show. Check it out. Even if you're not ready, you can see what we've got. All right, let's talk about some pivots here. Matt, I look at the running back position, and I said to you right before we started that if this one spot holds, even within a 5% range, I'll be baffled by it. And that is none other than Justin Jackson. Last week, he easily outsnapped Joshua Kelly. He looked far more efficient on the ground. Kelly did have some of those red zone opportunities, goal to go spots that I would have liked Jackson to have. But aside from that, he ran more routes than Joshua Kelly, and just all in all, looked like the far better rusher. That's subjective, right? I thought he looked like a much better rusher. But all in all, 6 targets, 21 total opportunities, 15 attempts. Justin Jackson's coming in at sub 5% right now. If that stands, it's insane.
Well, Loughy, there's some good data from college numbers to back up everything you're saying about Joshua Kelly being a vanilla runner, because if you look at all the running backs drafted in this class, he was bottom 5 in more forced missed tackles per attempt and yards created per attempt. So even at the college ranks, this isn't a guy that was really creating anything on his own. So seeing an explosive athlete like Justin Jackson come in and just run around him makes a lot of sense. And we do love what Justin Jackson saw. I think you can target Jackson even in a timeshare. So say you think that Joshua Kelly gets, 30, 40% of the work here. This LA team is so fast, they're 4th in plays per game, that there's still opportunity for 2 backs. Last week alone, Justin Jackson, 20 opportunities. Joshua Kelly, 12 opportunities. At 4,900 against this Jacksonville defense, there should be opportunities for both. And if Justin Jackson's going to take 60, 70%, I think you're certainly interested at that price. I do not think the ownership holds. I'm with you. I think it probably rises closer to 10, 12 by the end of the week.
Okay. Kyle, your thoughts on Jackson, even if he does come up to that 9 to 11, 12% range, just knowing that the matchup is sterling and, the opportunities were absolutely there last time. I will say the last thing, though, is that he doesn't have a single rushing attempt inside the 5-yard line this season. That's my one concern.
Yeah, so we saw basically Joshua Kelly was running ahead of him as that RB2 role behind Austin Eckler, and it completely flipped in the New Orleans game. And I think people are going to really anchor onto the fact that we saw a decent amount of Joshua Kelly, but that could just be that that's like the running back 2 role is how they wanted him to be, regardless of they have a very split role. If Austin Eckler plays this job, Joshua Kelly played that job, Justin Jackson steps in and takes over potentially Austin Eckler's job. So I do think there is a ton of possibility that people are just too anchored onto their Joshua Kelly love, or just from the prior weeks of seeing more of Joshua Kelly than Justin Jackson. But we know that could very well not be the case. So I guess this is what I'm saying is I'm actually not sure that we see that ownership rise. And if it doesn't rise, oh, baby, I'm playing so much Justin Jackson. And if it does rise, I'm probably still fairly confident in my Justin Jackson plays because he's not going to top much more than 10, 12%. We'll still have some more popular plays. One play that's kind of similar in that sense that I'm a little surprised right now at our ownership is Kenyon Drake.
Oh.
No, I've got one. Kenyon Drake. Swift is a good one too, though. I think there are a lot of like committee backs that people are afraid to play, but they're in relatively good spots. I like Kenyon Drake. I think Swift falls in that similar role where no, there are parts of their game that are lacking. We're going to see Adrian Peterson for Swift. We're going to see Chase Edmonds as a pass catcher who kind of, he ends up running in that role over Kenyon Drake. But Kenyon Drake has seen 2/3 of the carries. We know on this offense, they have a lot of touchdown potential, and he's been fairly explosive. We saw that. He scored in, I think, week 1, and he finally ended his scoring drought again, 2 nights ago now or whatever. He's just getting so many carries on a team that has a quarterback that can draw defenders away with his legs, on a team that can put up points in a game that should feature a ton of points. So I think in a similar role to DeAndre Swift in the sense of, no, they're not a bona fide bell cow back, but the ownership and the price more than reflect that. They overcorrect for that. And that's why I'm buying into these situations. Swift is another great example.
I've got to go to you, Matt, and follow up on Kyle's take, because you want to talk about a polarizing player right now from a fantasy standpoint. Look no further than Kenyon Drake. You're going to have a lot of people making the argument that it was Dallas. And to be fair, I tweeted the other day, I said, just so we're clear, this does not make him good, or this does not mean that he's good. I'm not saying he's bad, right? I'm honestly not. What I'm saying is I am at least tempering expectations in a matchup against Dallas, where he had 19 for 95, which is fine, prior to that 60-plus, 69-yard run where Dallas just literally gave up at the end of the game. So ultimately, everything Kyle says is valid. He's still getting all of the work, and I guess that's all that matters. And his price has come down below $5K. So volume and opportunity over talent, I guess, is still relevant here when it comes to Kenyon Drake.
Yeah, I've been losing a lot of money based on this opportunity throughout the year because he has been averaging over 18 touches per game, and that's not a new thing. It's been very consistent. He just lacks a role in the pass game. So maybe you want to call him a poor man's Derrick Henry, because that's basically the role he's playing. And he finally had those touchdowns come through. It wasn't a 2-game slate where I thought he projected a little bit worse than Ezekiel Elliott and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but we knew that was in his range of outcomes, and he just missed the pricing bump this week. So 4,800, he's going to be a good value. I have a question for you both, though. So someone I've had my eye on as a low-owned pivot at the running back position is Jerick McKinnon. And it seems that JaMycal Hasty's kind of been the hot name on waiver wires. This guy's an undrafted free agent coming out of Baylor, where he was in a timeshare with 2 other running backs who don't really have any NFL pedigree. But people want to seem to anoint this guy as, the next man up with Raheem Mostert out. We already saw Jerick McKinnon play this role. He had 18 touches and 22 touches in 2 games where Raheem Mostert was out. How do you see this breaking down? And do you think Jerick is potentially a pivot at that range? I kind of think he is.
Kyle?
Yeah, I agree. We saw, it was essentially the Jerick McKinnon show. Jeff Wilson, especially in the second game. The first game that Jerick McKinnon played, where he was, supposedly going to operate as the bell cow back, Jeff Wilson got 2 scores. But I believe Jerick McKinnon actually got hurt in that game and ended up coming back and being fine. But that's probably why we saw a lot of Jeff Wilson. I think we saw in their next game, their game plan was for Jerick McKinnon to be essentially a 3-down back, or close enough to a 3-down back. I'm not really buying any more than JaMycal Hasty playing a strictly backup or backup plus role. We're short, 8-9 carries. Jerick McKinnon has injury history and he's small, but we saw a handful of weeks ago that the role they want him to play it's Kareem Hunt-like, where he's short. You'll get some Dearness Johnson carries, whatever. But it is good enough at his ownership and at his price that I actually think, that's a very sharp pivot on this slate.
Okay. So let's stay on the subject of running back for a minute. Because if there's any spot where you could see some heavier chalk, it's probably here, but also some guys that are getting far less ownership than I initially suspected. Kyle, DeAndre Swift, who I actually thought that's who you were talking about, but it's tough to say because there's a lot of guys in a similar price range and a similar ownership tier. DeAndre Swift coming on easily his best game as a pro. It's not even close. He carried the ball 14 times. He's not running a ton of routes, but he's being targeted on almost a third of the routes that he runs. And while Adrian Peterson still out carried him 15-14, Swift was by far the better rusher. Sal Vetri mentioned on yesterday's First Look show that just fantasy points per snap, DeAndre Swift is basically doubling up Adrian Peterson this year. I want to kind of tamp down expectations as far as, does this mean DeAndre Swift immediately becomes the go-to guy? He's the bell cow back. Week 7 is where it starts against who do they even play?
They have a good one versus Atlanta, right?
They got Atlanta against Atlanta. I want to believe that's the case. And if you're getting him at such low ownership, I'm willing to roll the dice on that. But Swift to me is one of the few spots this week where ownership really means a lot to me. If he's 3%, I could see myself getting there. If Swift is coming in double digits and everyone feels like this is his week after last week and they're trying to jump on that wave, that's going to have me bucking this trend a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you laid out the exact argument for him is that he's going to be low owned. Do I have any idea if he comes in and just completely phases out Adrian Peterson? No. And I would say probably not. Like you said, he actually got fewer carries, one fewer carry to be specific, than Adrian Peterson. Do I think he comes in and completely shuts down Adrian Peterson? They're giving Swift 20 carries a game? No. But do I think we could continually see Adrian Peterson to be scaled back? That is absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible that 15, 16 carries and a handful of targets is the new weekly projection for DeAndre Swift. If it was high owned, I would say that is a very fragile projection that I want to fade because I know people can go they can go over the field on that and or they can be just way too high on him given what we know, which is very little. I would say you have such a high chance of busting. I'm going to fade you. This is the opposite scenario where he does have a very solid chance of having a crazy ceiling game many times from here on out because he looks a lot better than Adrian Peterson. So it's simply an ownership game where with him, the same thing with Justin Jackson, the same thing with Kenyon Drake. These guys all have potential for very big weeks at very low prices, yet no one seems to recognize that. Maybe with the exception of Kenyon Drake, 9% ownership is still outside the top 10, might even be outside the top 15, somewhere in there. Justin Jackson and DeAndre Swift perfectly fill that role where they're not awfully popular, they're incredibly cheap, and they have a ton of touch upside because the situation is just so ambiguous.
Yeah, and Big D says, don't chase his performance versus Jacksonville. Doesn't anyone learn not to chase big weeks in DFS?
No, everyone's learned that.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of the thing, Matt, is if nobody goes after him thinking that he can continue to get more they drafted DeAndre Swift in the second round when they just drafted a second round running back 2 years prior in Kenyon Johnson. Obviously, at some point, they're going to start using him. I think we're all agreeing that we don't know if it's going to be this week, but if everybody else is saying it's not going to be this week and it's a fluke, and go back to the passing game, even though Matt Ryan's attempting only 30 passes per game despite playing behind in half of them, then yeah, I have some interest.
I don't have a lot of interest in him. It more comes down to, I know he's going to be in a timeshare to some degree, whether it's 70-30 or more the 40-30-30 that it's been the entire year, because that's basically what it was last week, even in this breakout game, people like to say. I think you can just do better with targeting running backs that have full-time workloads. It's like I have to, predict that he's going to be on the field, which I can't do. And then I have to predict he's going to be well when he's on the field. So anytime I can just take away one of those extra little predictions, I'm going to try to. There's always the argument in large field tournaments, if he's literally unowned, sure, play him in your game stacks. But outside of that, I don't think I'm going to have any of DeAndre Swift.
Fair enough. I'm fine with either explanation to this. But if he comes in at 3%, this
then go crazy. Play anyone at 3%.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Plus, I just think he's easily the most talented back on that roster. Is there any question, though, regardless of what's going to happen, is there any question that he should probably be getting the bulk of work in that backfield? Not to say he will, but that he should be?
No, it's like every single situation where we have young players that were drafted highly that should be playing, like Antonio Gibson, just Justin Jefferson week 1, week 2. They put him on the field week 3. The guy's the best receiver on the team. It's I don't know what these coaching staffs are doing.
So, Kyle, before we go to wide receivers and then our stacks here, I'm paraphrasing you, but on Twitter yesterday, you did a Roto World show and you quote tweeted something to the extent of, if Gibson doesn't go off this week, we riot. Might be an untimely thing to say given this time, but I agree that this is a really interesting spot for Antonio Gibson, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Against the Dallas team that just made Kenyon Drake look like Barry Sanders, made Dearness Johnson look like LaDainian Tomlinson, and has essentially just caved on every opportunity they've had to stop opposing rushers, whether they're good or bad.
Yeah, I said that kind of in jest because I don't think it's going to happen. I said specifically he doesn't get 20 carries and 10 targets. That's obviously not going to happen because they really want to use J.D. McKissic. Do I know why they want to use him? My only lean is that he is, or at least heading into last week, he was like a top 5 graded pass blocker, which is cool. That's really neat. I don't care for fantasy, but it does make me think that that's probably why they're getting him in specifically on 2-minute drills when they're playing fast. They've used a lot of J.D. McKissic, so we're not seeing a ton of routes from Antonio Gibson, and even McKissic gets some carries. So I say that because I want it to happen, but I think I am on the side of, like Matt saying, DeAndre Swift, he's just not probably going to get a ton of work. I fall very much on that side with Antonio Gibson, where why aren't they giving him more touches? I don't know, but we can't assume rational coaching that a young, talented player like Antonio Gibson just plays over J.D. McKissic just because we like him more and because he probably is better. We just can't assume that's going to happen. And when you play for Washington, I don't think you have the upside that a guy like DeAndre Swift does in a game that's actually exciting. I get the defense is bad, but I just don't I'm not going to lean too heavily on defense when I know that we're not going to see a ton of Antonio Gibson, or at least I strongly think that way.
I want to disagree with you badly, but I feel like if there was ever a spot for Gibson, right, this would be it. It just hasn't been there. And then McKissic getting worked in more on the ground. He's being targeted at times. It's tough. Anyway, Matt, is there anyone else at the running back position that right now is getting particularly low ownership that you want to hit on?
I don't think so. I think we got everyone. The Justin Jacksons, the Jerick McKinnon was really the guy I wanted to highlight. And I think he'll be a polarizing one just with the strange Jermichael Hasty hype coming in this week. Not sure where it's coming from.
It's like one camp report that he was having a good camp, and like I get as like a 25th round best ball flyer, but yeah, I agree with you. I don't.
He couldn't separate himself from Tristan Ebner. Do you know who that is?
I don't know
exactly.
All right.
Exactly. He's in a 3-way timeshare at Baylor. Anyway, sorry. So I like Jerick McKinnon.
Our resident college football DFS expert just comes in with a hammer.
Yeah, I have no idea what he's talking about. Let's talk about wide receivers. Hey, guys, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and click that subscribe. If you don't like it, all you have to do is come back and click unsubscribe. It's very simple. Hell, you don't have to ever watch us again. But if you do like the content we have here, hit that thumbs up. It's the easiest way to help support us, especially with this YouTube algorithm. It helps us get this free content out to more people, and that's greatly appreciated. But subscribe, hit the notification bell as well if you haven't done so yet. And if you ever want to listen to all of our stuff without having to go on YouTube, maybe you don't have YouTube Premium and you hate the fact that you have to leave your phone open while you're listening, you could just check it out on really any podcast network that have any network that has podcasts available, any platform, that has podcasts available, because we are there, and you can listen to all of these shows from YouTube through iTunes or whatever it is. We've got you covered. Okay. Wide receiver. Let's hit on this quickly because there's not an excessive amount of chalk, just a bunch of spread out players here. Kyle, my two guys, I'll just tell you right now, would be Deante Johnson if he plays at 4%. Juju's coming in at like 1%. His price is down $1,000. People are very sour on Juju. Chase Claypool is clearly the talk of the town in Pittsburgh, and I understand that. But sometimes you have to be different. And this is a Pittsburgh team that can open things up. Tennessee, as I mentioned, you've seen them games averaging 60-plus points over the last 4 weeks, just massive shootouts, teams going 30-plus on both sides. I think 3 straight weeks we've seen that. So if Pittsburgh is going to go largely ignored because it's Claypool and everyone likes him and everyone's sour on Juju and no one knows what's going on with Deante Johnson, this will be a spot that I look to get to. What about you as far as some low-owned guys go?
Yeah, the ownership on all of these guys, starting at AJ Brown, is like the highest of the receivers in this game, is at 5.5%. Going down, you've got like Juju, no one's playing. Chase Claypool, even after touchdown last week, 4 touchdowns the week before that. And I guess this is, you said it, someone mentioned in the chat that like everyone just plays the best plays from last week. Our ownership projections and the results have showed that nobody does that anymore. Everyone is too sharp to an extent that like Christian Kirk, double touchdown, coming in at 3% ownership. Like,
because he was targeted 3 times?
I think I might have only been 2. So I think that's why it's okay to play the previous good plays of the previous, breakout games when the volume is there. For me, that is, I guess it's not a previous good play until, I don't know, week 2 or whatever. Deante Johnson up until week 3 was just dominating targets in Pittsburgh, and he was actually going fairly downfield, not the Juju role where he's like a glorified Christian McCaffrey as a receiver, but doesn't have any juice after the catch or something. Maybe I'm not excited about Juju just because I have been so heavily burned by him this season as a defense mechanism, but I think you can get just as good, if not a better projection from a guy like Chase Claypool, who despite having back-to-back good games, no one seems to be on. Deante Johnson was leading the team in targets through 3 weeks, I believe, as well. He didn't even play hardly in week 3. He was still leading the team in targets. And he was dominating in targets.
Double-digit targets in week 1 and week 2, Kyle.
Yeah, it was like 34% targets, 37% air yards off the top of my head. He was a dominant receiver in this offense. And like you said, this game should feature a ton of points. So my preferred side to take is either Deante Johnson or Chase Claypool, or both in Roethlisberger's stack. I get the argument with Juju as well, though, and his early career production is so good. A.J. Brown just coming in at low owned. This game, like you said, I don't know if I was coming into this show thinking too much about this game. I'm coming out of it thinking a lot about this game. All the Pittsburgh receivers are in play. A.J. Brown is a great run back as well.
Awesome. Yeah, seriously, if they're all coming in at sub 5% in a game that has a 51.5 point total, and we've seen the Tennessee Titans involved in games that shoot out the big way, even Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago against Philly and a couple of other times, knowing too that there are some very good weapons on both sides of this game, regardless of Pittsburgh's strength defensively, I'm all over it. Matt, you know what? While we're at it and we're kind of short on time, let's just do this. Some of the cheaper owned receivers are going to be involved in the lower owned stacks. There aren't really any chalky stacks. So let's close it out with some of our favorite low owned receivers that could be worked into game or team stacks like we just did with Pittsburgh.
Yeah, what I like is the LA Chargers side of this Chargers-Jacksonville game. I like Herbert. He's been really efficient through a very young career. And I think Mike Williams is a really nice pivot and leverage point off of Justin Jackson, who I think he doesn't have a really high ownership projection right now, but I think it increases throughout the week. And then you get major leverage off a guy like Keenan Allen, who is a top 5 owned wide receiver on this slate. Mike Williams essentially has 2 healthy games this year, and he has target counts of 9 and 8. That's exceptional volume in an offense that's playing very fast. They're 4th in plays per game, 11th in seconds per play, and they're going up against a defense that can't stop anybody.
Slug Waffles. That's a name. I have YouTube Premium, but I leave it open because I like looking at y'all's faces. Thanks, pal. What a nice thing to say. All right, so Kyle, let's talk about a couple more here before we head out. Right now, as it stands on a Wednesday, middle of the week, you got Houston, you mentioned, 8.3% quarterback ownership. That's the highest on the slate. And in Kansas City, it's 7%. Chargers at 6.8%. If you look down, you got Pittsburgh at 2.5%. Is there anyone else down here at the bottom that appeals to you, whether it be Dallas, Cleveland, Carolina, New Orleans, all of them at 4% or lower? That's crazy.
Yeah. So I don't think, because there are so many there's so many high total games that you need to go too incredibly crazy. I would say if I'm looking to get a little bit weird, a little bit different, I think there are a few spots. Pittsburgh, I think, is one of the better spots. I would say, though, both sides of New Orleans, Carolina, maybe not as much Drew Brees. I don't know. I think you could go to either side of this. I think just in terms of the lower owned spots, I really like what I've seen from the Carolina side specifically. And they haven't been doing it with touchdowns. They're number 11 in yardage, but they're only, I believe, number 23 in touchdowns. If they're going to keep producing yardage at such a high clip, I do think we see some touchdown regression from this team. And some of it up until last week was going to Mike Davis as well. So I think the stacking options are clear with Teddy Bridgewater. He's played fairly well. He's got one of the higher completion percentages in the league. And this game has some sneaky shootout potential. And people really love talking about the Saints defense. They're the number 28 or something ranked coverage unit by Pro Football Focus. They're just not the same team we've seen in recent years. I'm fine with going into that game and getting a lot of players involved.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you guys watching as always. Before you head out, hit that thumbs up, hit the subscribe, follow Matt at Matt_Gajewski, Kyle at Kyle Tweets Here, myself at Laffy_D. I don't know why I do it, but the DMs are open. If you have any questions about joining us over at Awesemo.com, you can hit me up and I'll definitely get around to answering. So, appreciate you guys hanging out as always. Thanks, Jordan, for producing always doing a good job. And stick around. We've got plenty of content. Well, not actually that much content anymore coming up throughout the day, but we do have a couple of things to stick around for. MLB Live Before Lock today. We got the PGA Live Before Lock coming up after that at 8:30 p.m. So later on in the day, we're going to have a lot popping here at youtube.com/Awesemo. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Matt Savoca and myself. It's the Thursday Marathon Matchup Show right here at Awesemo.com.